My name is Darcy Fisher, and I'm 31 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where I work as a freelance graphic designer and event photographer. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills, and I like being my own boss. I should have known that family dinner was a setup. My parents never invited me over unless they had something to say, usually something that made me feel like the spare part in their perfect little picture. But I went anyway. Deep down, I guess I still hoped this time would be different. We were all at the table in their nice house in the historic district. My younger brother Colt was already there, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Mom was smiling at him the way she always does. Dad cleared his throat and said they'd decided to divide some of their assets early. Colt's eyes lit up instantly. Mom reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're giving you the luxury villa near the beach, sweetheart." Colt grinned like he'd just won the lottery. Then Dad turned to me. His face was flat. "And you, Darcy, you'll get the empty piece of land out in the suburbs." Silence. Mom waved a hand like it was no big deal. "At least you'll have somewhere to pitch a tent if you ever feel like camping." They laughed. Colt snorted. I just sat there for a second, then pushed my chair back. "Thanks," I said quietly, stood up and walked out. I got in my truck and drove home through the cool fall night, the salt air coming in through the window. If you've ever been treated like the afterthought in your own family, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. When I got back to my small apartment that night, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop right away. The screen light felt harsh in the quiet room, but I needed something to do with my hands. Memories started flooding in the moment I stopped moving. Growing up, it had always been clear who the favorite was. My younger brother Colt Fisher, 27 years old, had everything handed to him without ever asking twice. When he turned 16, my parents surprised him with a brand new pickup truck keys dangling from a ribbon like it was Christmas morning. That same summer, they sent him on a language program in Europe, calling it an investment in his future. Meanwhile, I was 16 and already working weekends at a local cafe, saving every tip for community college because no one offered to cover my tuition. I never resented the work itself. It taught me how to stand on my own. But the difference in how we were treated cut deeper than I admitted back then. Mom would brag about Colt's grades or his soccer games to anyone who listened, while my late shifts and straight A's barely got a nod. Dad would say things like "Colt has potential," as if I didn't. It wasn't loud or cruel, just constant quiet favoritism that made me feel like an outsider in my own family. I closed those thoughts and pulled up the property documents instead. The deed was simple: 2 acres of undeveloped land on the outskirts of Charleston. From the satellite view, it looked forgotten, overgrown with tall grass and scattered pines, dirt paths barely visible. But I zoomed in and noticed something. New subdivisions were popping up less than a mile away, roofs going up fast on what used to be farmland. The area was changing. That land wasn't as worthless as they made it sound. Selling it would have been the easy move: take the money, pay off my student loans, move on. But the way they laughed at the table flashed in my mind, and something stubborn rose up inside me. I wasn't going to let this be another thing they got to dismiss. I wanted to build something real on that ground, something that was mine because I made it happen, not because it was handed over. I glanced at the clock. It was late, but I knew one person who would pick up no matter what. I called my best friend Casey Grant, the only person who had ever believed in me without conditions. We met in college during a group project, and Casey stuck around when everyone else drifted away after graduation. I told Casey everything: the dinner, the villa for Colt, the empty land, the laughter. There was silence on the line for a second. Then Casey said, "They did what, Darcy? That's messed up. But you know what? That land is yours now. You can do whatever you want with it. I'm in. Tell me how I can help." Hearing that steady voice on the other end loosened something tight in my chest. For the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this. We talked for over an hour, throwing ideas around. Casey suggested looking into event spaces or market something that fit Charleston's love for outdoor gatherings. By the time we hung up, I had a spark of direction. The next morning, I started researching South Carolina land regulations. I bookmarked the Charleston County zoning website, read through permitted uses for agricultural and commercial mixed land, and downloaded forms for permits. I learned about environmental assessments, setback requirements, and utility access. It was overwhelming pages of legal language and fees I hadn't expected, but I kept going, making notes in a new folder labeled Land Project. Every search felt like a small act of defiance, proof that I wasn't going to roll over and accept their joke as the final word. Days turned into weeks of quiet determination. I drove out to the property a few times after work, walking the boundaries as the sun set, imagining possibilities. The air smelled like pine and salt from the distant ocean. Birds flew overhead, and the ground felt solid under my boots. It wasn't much yet, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a real shot at turning nothing into something they couldn't ignore. Throughout that winter, I spent most weekends driving out to the land. The drive took about 40 minutes from my apartment along roads lined with live oaks, dripping Spanish moss, the kind of scenery that makes Charleston feel timeless. I'd roll the windows down even when the air was chilly and damp, letting the smell of wet soil and pine clear my head. Each trip was a promise to myself that I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. After weeks of online research and late-night reading, I settled on the idea of an outdoor event venue combined with weekend markets and pop-up shops. It felt perfect for Charleston people here, love anything that gets them outside, especially when it involves local food crafts and live music. The city already had successful farmers markets downtown, but out in the suburbs, there was room for something new, something community-focused that could grow with the neighborhoods springing up nearby. The permitting process turned out to be the biggest hurdle. I submitted applications to the city for zoning changes and event permits, attending a couple of planning commission meetings, where I explained my vision in detail. It dragged on for months with revisions and waiting periods, but I kept at it, printing out emails and filing everything neatly. In the meantime, Casey came through with a $10,000 loan from personal savings, no interest, just a simple agreement between friends. That covered the basics, and I supplemented it with my own savings, plus a few extra freelance design projects I took on during evenings. Once the permits started coming through, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work on the land itself. I hired a small excavator for a few days to level the roughest spots and clear overgrown brush, watching as the tangled mess slowly opened up into usable space. I shopped around for affordable outdoor string lights, folding tables and chairs from restaurant supply auctions, and a portable stage kit that could be assembled quickly. Part of the main area got artificial turf to keep it green and mud-free year-round, while the rest stayed natural for that authentic outdoor feel. The winter weather in the south didn't make it easy. Light rain fell almost every weekend, turning the soil into slick mud that sucked at my boots and coated everything in a fine layer of clay. I'd show up in rain gear, spending hours hauling debris or staking out sections only to pack up soaked and exhausted as the sun set early. There were days when progress felt invisible, when I questioned if I was crazy for pouring so much energy into something my own family had dismissed as worthless. But pushing through those moments built a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. Every load of gravel spread, every light string tested, was proof that I could create value where others saw none. By early spring, when the azaleas started blooming along the highways and the air warmed enough for short sleeves, everything was ready for a soft opening. I kept it small on purpose, just a handful of local vendors I'd met through online groups, a baker with fresh pastries, an artisan selling handmade jewelry, a farmer with seasonal produce, and a coffee cart for morning visitors. I posted a simple event on community Facebook pages and put up a few flyers around nearby neighborhoods. The first Saturday surprised me. People showed up steadily, from mid-morning families with kids, couples walking dogs, groups of friends looking for something different to do. The weather cooperated perfectly: clear skies, gentle breeze off the coast, warm sun without the summer humidity yet. Vendors sold out of several items by afternoon, and strangers lingered at the tables chatting and enjoying the open space. Watching it all come together, hearing laughter echo across ground that had been empty weeds just months before, filled me with a deep, steady satisfaction. This wasn't handed to me. I had built it step by step, and on that first day, it already felt like the start of something real. Just a few months later, in the sweltering summer heat of Charleston, my venue had become a familiar weekend spot for locals. The humidity hung thick in the air, but that didn't stop people from coming out. Weekends filled with the sound of live music, local acoustic guitarists, or small bluegrass bands playing under the string lights as the sun dipped low. Food trucks lined up along one side serving fresh shrimp boils, low country barbecue, and oysters straight from the coast, their grills sending savory smells across the open space. Pop-up tents featured artisans selling handmade pottery, woven baskets, and custom jewelry that caught the golden evening light. Families booked small outdoor birthday parties with picnic setups, while couples chose the venue for intimate weddings under the pines, exchanging vows as fireflies started to flicker at dusk. Word spread steadily through the community. I took photos during events, golden hour shots of laughing groups, close-ups of food, wide angles of the crowd under lights, and posted them on my Instagram account, along with the venue's new page. Local Facebook groups for Charleston events and family activities picked them up quickly, shares turning into bookings as people tagged friends and planned their weekends around us. Before long, Saturdays and Sundays were consistently busy, with cars filling the gravel parking area I'd created and overflow spilling onto the shoulder of the nearby road. Running it all kept me moving from dawn until well after dark. I coordinated with vendors each week, adjusted layouts for different events, and handled small issues like generator maintenance or extra trash pickup. The physical work left me tired in a satisfying way, muscles aching from hauling tables or stringing extra lights. But seeing strangers relax and enjoy the space made it worth every drop of sweat. It wasn't just a business anymore. It felt like I'd carved out a little corner of the community that welcomed everyone, a place where people made memories on ground that had once been written off as nothing. One Saturday afternoon, when the venue was packed with a mix of regulars and new faces enjoying the music and food, I noticed a familiar SUV pull into the lot. Mom and Colt stepped out, looking around with expressions I couldn't quite read at first. They walked slowly between the tents, pausing to watch a band set up and glance at the food lines. I was checking on a vendor when Mom spotted me and waved me over with a small smile. We stood off to the side near some shading trees away from the main crowd. Mom looked at the bustling scene and said softly that she was impressed with how nice everything turned out. Then she added almost casually that since the land was originally family property, maybe I should consider sharing some of the profits with everyone back home. Colt nodded along, arms crossed, scanning the area like he was sizing up an investment. Hearing those words hit harder than I expected, a reminder that even now they saw this as something they had a claim to, rather than something I'd built from scratch. I kept my voice steady and told them I appreciated them coming by, but this was my project, funded and created through my own work. Mom's smile faded a little and Colt shifted uncomfortably, but neither pushed further right then. They wandered a bit more, bought a couple of drinks from a truck, and eventually left without saying much else. Watching their SUV pull away, I felt a mix of old hurt resurfacing and a stronger resolve underneath it. This place was mine, earned through every decision and every long day, and no one could redraw those lines now. The rest of that summer rolled on with steady growth. Bookings increased for private events, vendors asked to return regularly, and repeat customers became familiar faces who greeted me by name. Late nights cleaning up under the stars gave me time to reflect on how far this had come from a dismissed piece of dirt. The success wasn't loud or flashy, but it was solid, built on effort that no one could take credit for but me. And in those quiet moments with music fading and lights glowing softly, I felt a deep, quiet pride that finally drowned out the echoes of that family dinner. A few weeks after that, Colt texted me for the first time in a long while. The message popped up while I was closing up the venue on a quiet weekday evening, the last vendors packing their vans under fading light. It was short, asking if we could meet soon because he needed to talk about something important. No greeting, no explanation, just that direct tone he'd always had when he wanted something. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Part of me considered ignoring it, but curiosity and a lingering sense of family pulled me to reply and suggest he come by the venue the next afternoon when things were slow. He showed up right on time, driving a brand new SUV that still had temporary plates gleaming in the sun. Colt stepped out, looking polished as usual, designer sunglasses and a watch that caught the light, but there was tension in his shoulders I hadn't seen before. We walked to a shaded picnic table away from the setup crew, and he got straight to the point after a brief glance around. Over the past year, he explained, life at the villa had escalated quickly. He'd traded in his old car for this bigger model, taken several trips to Europe with friends, and hosted large parties that drew crowds from all over the coast. The expenses added up faster than he expected, credit card balances climbing, then refinancing the villa to cover them and keep the lifestyle going. Now the bills were piling up, seriously, interest compounding on everything, and collectors starting to call. He needed a bridge loan, something to tide him over until he could sort out longer-term options. When he said the amount, $100,000, his voice stayed casual, like he was asking to borrow a lawnmower. He framed it as temporary, promising to pay back once things stabilized, emphasizing that we were family, and families helped each other in tough spots. Hearing him lay it out stirred a complicated wave inside me. On one hand, there was worry for the trouble he'd gotten into, the kind of fear you feel for someone you grew up with, no matter how distant things have become. On the other, resentment surfaced, sharp and clear. Colt had always moved through life with a safety net woven from mom and dad's choices, receiving opportunities and bailouts that never extended my way. While he spent freely on luxuries, I'd scraped together every dollar for this venue, turning dismissed land into something sustainable through choices no one else supported. I took a slow breath and told him as calmly as I could that I couldn't lend the money. I explained that everything here, the growth, the stability, was built from my own resources and effort, without the kind of backing he'd always had from our parents. Helping him now would mean pulling from what I'd created independently, and I wasn't in a position to do that. Colt's expression shifted from confident to surprised, then frustrated. He leaned forward, voice rising slightly, accusing me of being selfish, of forgetting where I came from, of holding a grudge over old stuff that didn't matter anymore. The words stung because part of me wondered if there was truth in them. But deeper down, I knew this wasn't about grudges. It was about patterns that had shaped both our lives differently. I stayed firm, repeating that I wished him the best in figuring it out, but couldn't be the solution this time. Colt stood up abruptly, shaking his head, muttering that he couldn't believe I'd turned my back when he really needed help. He walked back to his SUV without looking around at the venue again, engine revving as he pulled away. Sitting there alone after he left, I felt the weight of the conversation settle heavily. There was sadness for how far apart we'd grown, mixed with relief that I'd held my boundary. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the space I'd built, and I realized protecting what I'd earned wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Family ties don't obligate you to carry someone else's consequences forever, especially when those consequences stem from advantages you never shared. Late that next summer, when my venue was at its peak with bookings solid every weekend, Mom started calling repeatedly. The phone would ring during setup or while I was talking to vendors, her name flashing on the screen, until I finally let it go to voicemail. Messages piled up over days, each one a little more urgent, asking if we could talk soon about something serious involving Dad. I knew avoiding it forever wasn't fair, so I texted back, suggesting they come by the venue one evening after closing when it would be quiet. They arrived together in Dad's older truck parking near the entrance as the last guests left and lights dimmed. Mom got out first, looking tired in a way I hadn't seen often, while Dad moved slower, hands in his pockets. We sat at one of the picnic tables under the string lights that stayed on for cleanup, the air still warm and heavy with the scent of grilled seafood lingering from the day's food trucks. Dad did most of the talking after a few awkward pleasantries about how busy the place looked. He explained that his small local seafood distribution business had hit rough waters over the past year. A major partner pulled out unexpectedly, leaving gaps in contracts, and rising fuel costs for delivery trucks ate into margins that were already thin. Inventory spoiled during supply chain delays, loans taken to cover shortfalls added interest, and now creditors were pressing hard. Without fresh capital to stabilize and renegotiate terms, the company faced shutdown within months. Mom added quietly that they'd exhausted other options, cutting expenses, selling equipment, even dipping into retirement savings. The amount they needed to bridge the crisis and keep things afloat long enough to recover was $200,000. They framed it as an investment in the family legacy Dad had built over decades, something that could benefit everyone if it turned around. Listening to them lay it out brought a complicated ache. Dad's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd always provided, now facing the possibility of losing what he'd worked for. Mom's eyes pleaded in that familiar way she used when trying to hold things together. Part of me felt genuine sympathy for the stress they were under, the fear of financial collapse at their age. But underneath ran a current of exhaustion from years of watching resources flow one direction while my efforts went unnoticed. I gathered my thoughts and spoke carefully, telling them I understood how difficult this must be and that I was sorry they were going through it. Then I explained why I couldn't help with the money. For so long, their choices had consistently prioritized Colt's path over mine, directing support and opportunities his way in ways that shaped our lives differently. My venue, everything stable I had now, came solely from decisions and risks I took alone, without that same backing. Using it to rescue consequences tied to those long-standing priorities would mean undoing the independence I'd fought to create. Dad listened with a tight expression, nodding slowly at points but looking defeated by the end. Mom's face fell, tears welling, though she didn't let them spill. They didn't argue or raise voices, just sat in heavy silence for a moment before thanking me for hearing them out. Dad said he respected my position even if it hurt, and Mom gave a small hug that felt more formal than warm. They walked back to the truck together, driving off into the humid night without looking back. Standing there as their taillights disappeared, I felt a profound mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the pain in their voices, for a family connection strained beyond easy repair. Relief that I'd spoken my truth without anger, holding the line that protected what I'd built. The venue around me stood quiet under the stars, a tangible reminder of self-reliance earned the hard way. In that stillness, I accepted that loving from a distance was sometimes the healthiest choice left. After that last meeting, I decided to focus completely on my own life. Time passed in a steady rhythm of seasons changing around the venue. Fall brought cooler evenings and leaves, turning along the drive and drawing even more visitors who wanted photos among the colors. I stayed busy with daily operations, fine-tuning schedules, and building relationships with reliable vendors who returned season after season. The routine grounded me, each successful event reinforcing that I'd made the right choice in standing firm. Several months later, news about the family reached me indirectly through mutual acquaintances we still shared in Charleston's small circles. Colt hadn't managed to turn things around. The mounting debt from his spending caught up, fully payments missed for too long, and the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the villa. It went through the standard legal process, public notices, auction listing, and eventually sold to cover what was owed. He had to move out with little notice, renting a modest apartment downtown while sorting through the fallout. Dad's company didn't recover either. Without the injection they'd hoped for, cash flow dried up completely. Suppliers demanded payment on overdue invoices, and with no new contracts coming in, the only option left was to wind down operations. The business that had provided for us growing up closed its doors quietly, equipment sold off, and the small warehouse leased to someone else. My parents faced tough decisions to stay afloat, putting their second home on the market and downsizing personal belongings to pay down remaining obligations. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just the slow, unavoidable consequence of years of strained finances catching up. They tried reaching out a few more times after that. Texts came on holidays or random Tuesdays, asking how I was doing and suggesting coffee to catch up. The messages were polite, almost careful, but carried an undercurrent of hope that things might soften. I read them, felt the familiar pull of old ties, and chose not to respond. Continuing the conversation would only reopen wounds I'd finally started healing. Eventually, I blocked the numbers not out of anger, but to protect the peace I'd worked hard to build. It was one of the hardest decisions I've made, yet it brought a clarity that let me breathe deeper than I had in years. Meanwhile, the venue kept growing in ways I hadn't imagined at the start. I hired 2 full-time staff members to handle daily coordination, freeing me to plan bigger events, tailored to Charleston's fall calendar harvest festivals, with local brewers, oyster roasts under the oaks, and evening concerts featuring regional artists. Attendance held strong through the milder weather, revenue stabilizing enough to set aside reserves and upgrade lighting and sound systems. Partnerships formed naturally with tourism boards and wedding planners who recommended the space regularly. Watching it all expand felt like tending a garden that finally bloomed after patient seasons of care. Looking back as the years settled, I see the real cost of favoritism, not just financial, but emotional. It created distances that money couldn't bridge and expectations that reality couldn't meet. The lesson I carry now is simple yet profound. True family isn't defined only by blood, but by mutual respect and support shown consistently over time. When that respect is absent for too long, walking away isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation. I chose to protect what I'd built, and the mental peace that came with it, cutting ties completely without regret weighing me down. Some chapters close so new ones can open fully. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening all the way to the end of my story. If anything resonated with you, whether it's about family dynamics, building something from nothing, or finding the courage to set boundaries, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter too, and reading them means the world to me.